Florida State University sits at the northern edge of Tallahassee, where Spanish moss hangs low over red brick buildings, and the campus at night is lit by amber street lamps that cast long shadows across the sidewalks. It is the kind of place that feels, in the small hours of the morning, like something from another era. Quiet in a way that convinces you nothing bad could happen there. At 661 West Jefferson Street stands the Chi Omega Sorority House, a white 2-story building set back from the road behind a row of old oak trees. In January of 1978, 39 young women called it home. Most of them had been out on the night of January 14th, a Sunday, the tail end of a long weekend. They had gone to bars, to parties, to the ordinary pleasures of college life. By 2 a.m, the house had settled into quiet. The windows were dark. The doors were locked. Or most of them were. A door at the back of the house had been left unsecured. At approximately 3:15 in the morning, a man entered through that door. He was 31 years old. He had dark hair and dark eyes, and a face that every person who ever met him described the same way. Handsome, charming, like someone you would want to know, like someone you could trust. He moved through the downstairs hallway without making a sound and climbed the stairs to the second floor. In a room at the end of the hall, Lisa Levy slept. She was 20 years old, a junior from St. Petersburg, Florida, who had been studying criminology. She had plans. She had been out dancing earlier that night and had come home happy. She died in her sleep and never knew it was happening. In the room beside hers, Margaret Bowman was 21 years old, also from St. Petersburg, and her friends would later describe her as someone who lit up whatever room she walked into. She was gone before she could wake. Further down the hall, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner were found alive, beaten with a force so savage that no clinical description of it captures what it means. Karen Chandler lost multiple teeth. Kathy Kleiner's jaw was shattered. Both of them would carry the weight of that night for the rest of their lives. He was inside the house for less than 15 minutes. He walked out into the dark, crossed Jefferson Street, and walked 3 blocks to the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, 21 years old, a dance student who had been rehearsing for a recital. She survived. She would lose the hearing in one ear and suffer a dislocated shoulder and a fractured skull, and she would wake in a hospital bed with no memory of what had put her there. 5 women attacked in a single night, 2 of them dead. By the time police arrived at the Chi Omega house that morning, the man responsible had returned to his rented room on West College Avenue, hung up his coat, and gone to sleep. His name was Theodore Robert Bundy, and he had been doing this for 4 years. To understand who Ted Bundy was and what made him into the thing he became, we have to go back to the beginning of his life, to a maternity home in Vermont, to a family secret that shaped everything that followed, and to a question that his case has never fully answered. How does something like this begin? Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946, at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His mother was Eleanor Louise Cowell, 22 years old, unmarried, the daughter of a respectable Philadelphia family who were appalled by what the pregnancy meant. The father's identity was recorded only vaguely. Eleanor's family maintained for years that the father was a man named Lloyd Marshall, a sailor, a traveling salesman, someone who had abandoned her and moved on. Other members of the family whispered something darker, that the father might have been Eleanor's own father, Samuel Cowell. The question was never resolved. Ted Bundy, by his own account, never knew with certainty who his biological father was. Samuel Cowell was a landscaper and a church deacon in Philadelphia. He was also, by many accounts, a man of profound violence. He beat his wife, Louise, he swung the family's cats by their tails, and hurled them across the room in fits of anger. He would become enraged without warning and without apparent cause. His grandchildren would later describe being afraid of him. He talked to headstones in the cemetery. He kept a collection of pornographic magazines and violent material hidden in his home. It was in that house in Philadelphia that young Teddy Cowell spent the first years of his life, surrounded by a family performing normalcy while something deeply wrong moved beneath the surface. The story constructed to manage Eleanor's shame was simple. She was presented to neighbors and acquaintances as Teddy's older sister. Samuel and Louise were presented as his parents. The boy who would become Ted Bundy grew up believing that his mother was his sister, that his grandparents were his parents, and that the stain of his actual origins was something to be hidden rather than spoken about. He was 3 or 4 years old when he found his grandfather's pornography collection. He would later speak about this discovery in interviews conducted while he sat on death row, describing it as a formative event, a moment of encountering something that reached into him and found a response he did not understand. Whether this claim was true or a performance designed to construct a narrative of causation that might generate sympathy has never been established. What is established is that the magazines were there and that the boy found them, and that some part of what he encountered in them stayed with him. When Eleanor eventually moved to Washington State to start a new life, she took her son with her. She married a man named Johnny Bundy, a hospital cook from Tacoma, who was, by all accounts, a decent and gentle man who tried his best to connect with the increasingly withdrawn boy who came with the marriage. Ted took his stepfather's name. He became Ted Bundy. He kept the name for the rest of his life. But the connection to Johnny Bundy never deepened into anything like real relationship. In his later interviews, Ted Bundy almost never mentioned his stepfather, as though the man had never really existed. In Tacoma, Washington, in the mid-1950s and into the 1960s, Ted Bundy grew up in a neighborhood of ordinary houses and ordinary families. He was a smart boy. Teachers noted his intelligence and his facility with language. He had a kind of surface appeal, the kind of warmth that adults found impressive in a child. But even then, the people closest to him noticed something unusual in the texture of his social life. He did not make friends in the way other children did. He could perform friendship, could say the right things in the right moments, but he did not seem to feel it. He watched other people the way someone from another country might study the customs of a place they had moved to, trying to learn the rules from the outside rather than absorbing them from within. He stole, not occasionally, not casually, but systematically. Skis from a neighbor's garage, golf equipment from a pro shop. He shoplifted with a practiced ease that went undetected for years. He told no one about it. He felt, he would say later, no particular guilt. The things he wanted, he took. It was that simple. At night, some of his neighbors would later recall. They occasionally glimpsed a face at the window, looking in. By the time Ted Bundy reached the University of Washington in the mid-1960s, he had developed a surface personality of considerable sophistication. He was articulate, funny in company, genuinely likable in the way that certain people are likable because they have studied what likability looks like and replicated it precisely. He studied Chinese for a time, then shifted to psychology, the study of the mind, which some of his acquaintances later found retrospectively chilling. And then, during his years at the university, he met the woman whose rejection would become, by his own account, and by the account of almost every person who has studied him, the central event of his emotional life. Her name was Stephanie Brooks. She was from a wealthy California family, dark-haired and sophisticated, and she carried herself with a confidence that Bundy found overwhelming. They began a relationship in 1967. He was deeply attached to her. More than attached, he was, in whatever way he was capable of it, in love with her. Or with the idea of her. Or with what having her meant about who he was. But in 1968, Stephanie Brooks ended it. She told him gently, but clearly, that she found him directionless, without ambition, full of potential but unable to commit to a future that matched the kind of life she wanted. She returned to California and moved on, as people do. Ted Bundy did not move on. What followed in the years after Stephanie's rejection has been analyzed at length by psychologists and criminologists, and while the exact mechanism of what happened to him remains debated, what we can see from the outside is a man who responded to rejection by beginning to rebuild himself. He enrolled in law school. He became deeply involved in Republican Party politics in Washington state, working on campaigns, being noticed by senior figures in the party. He worked on Governor Daniel Evans' re-election campaign in 1972 and was praised for his dedication. He also took a volunteer position at the Seattle Crisis Center, a suicide hotline, where he answered calls from people in despair and talked strangers back from the edge. It was at the Crisis Center that he met Ann Rule. Ann Rule was a crime writer who would eventually write one of the most important true crime books ever published. In the early 1970s, she was a writer working part-time at the Crisis Center, and she and Ted Bundy worked the same overnight shifts, sitting beside each other, answering calls, talking to people in pain. She found him kind and dependable and thoughtful. She liked him. She trusted him. She would spend years after his arrest trying to reconcile the man she had known with the man the evidence revealed him to be. In 1973, Ted Bundy recontacted Stephanie Brooks. He had been working toward this for years. He called her, and she answered. And when she encountered him again, she found someone transformed. Confident, purposeful, well-dressed, a man with a future visible in every line of him. She fell for him again. They talked about marriage. She believed that this time it was going to be everything she had once hoped it might be. And then, without warning, without explanation, he stopped calling. He never spoke to her again. He would describe this later in an interview from death row, with a kind of flatness that was perhaps more disturbing than anger would have been. He said he had needed to know he could win her back. That having proven it to himself, she was no longer of interest to him. That what he had wanted was the conquest, not the person. What he wanted by that point in the winter of 1974 had been building inside him for years, through the pornography and the isolation and the fantasy life he had constructed in the space between his public personality and whatever was actually happening beneath it. The two things, the public Ted Bundy and the private one, had existed side by side for so long that perhaps even he could no longer distinguish clearly between them. On the night of January 4th, 1974, in a basement apartment in Seattle's University District, 18-year-old Sharon Clark was asleep in her bed. A man entered through a basement window. He used a metal rod pulled from her bed frame. She survived, but she spent 10 days in a coma, and the neurological damage she sustained was permanent. Police had no witnesses, no suspects, and no explanation for why anyone would do this to a young woman asleep in her own home. Less than a month later, on the night of February 1, Linda Ann Healy vanished from her basement room in a house near the university. Linda was 21 years old, a psychology student, and a weather reporter for a local radio station, a woman her friends described as one of the most genuinely good people they had ever known. When her housemates went to wake her the next morning, her bed was neatly made. Her nightgown was folded and placed in the closet. There were bloodstains on her pillow. She had been taken in the night, and whoever had taken her had made the bed behind them before leaving. On March 12, 19-year-old Donna Gail Manson left her dormitory at Evergreen State College in Olympia to walk to a jazz concert on campus. She was 5 feet tall, free-spirited, deeply loved by her friends. She never arrived at the concert. She was never seen again. On April 17, Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18 years old and a freshman at Central Washington State College, walked across campus on her way to a meeting. She disappeared between 2 buildings. On May 6, Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22, a student at Oregon State University in Corvallis, left her dormitory for dinner and simply was not there when her friends arrived at the restaurant. On June 1st, Brenda Carol Ball, 22 years old, was last seen at a tavern in the Seattle suburb of Burlington. She had missed a shift at work, and her employer assumed she had quit. She had not quit. She was gone. On June 11, Georgian Hawkins, 18 years old and a member of a sorority at the University of Washington, walked down a well-lit alleyway between 2 campus buildings at around 1 in the morning. An alleyway overlooked by dormitory windows from which residents later reported hearing nothing unusual. She was gone. Her high-heeled shoes were found in the alleyway. Nothing else. 7 young women in Washington and Oregon had now disappeared without a trace, without witnesses, without any physical evidence pointing to a perpetrator. The investigation was enormous and largely silent in its results. Police in multiple jurisdictions were working the cases. A King County detective named Bob Keppel had become increasingly consumed by the pattern. By the way these disappearances clustered around university campuses, by the profile of the victims, dark-haired young women, mostly, and by the complete absence of witnesses or physical evidence that should have been impossible to achieve in populated areas. But there were no suspects. There were no leads. There was only the absence of 7 women who had been there one moment and simply were not there the next. And then came July 14th, 1974. It was the hottest day of the summer in the Seattle area. Tens of thousands of people drove out to Lake Sammamish State Park to spend the day on the water. Families, couples, college students, friends, the ordinary crowd of a perfect summer Sunday at a popular beach. The parking lots overflowed onto the grass. The beach was packed. Music played from radios on blankets. Children ran in and out of the water. It was the kind of day that makes the Pacific Northwest forget the long gray winters entirely. Janice Ann Ott was 23 years old, a graduate student in social work who had ridden her bicycle to the lake alone. She was lying on her blanket in the sun, reading, at around 12:30 in the afternoon when a young man approached her. He was handsome, athletic-looking, and his left arm was in a blue sling. He introduced himself as Ted. He said he needed help loading a sailboat onto his car in the parking lot. He had hurt his arm, he explained, and could not manage on his own. Would she mind? Multiple witnesses later told police they had heard this conversation. They described watching Janice Ott stand up, gather her things, and walk away with the young man toward the parking lot. Several of them thought nothing of it at the time. He seemed pleasant. She seemed unconcerned. The sun was shining and it was a perfect summer afternoon, and nothing about the moment suggested anything wrong. Janice Ott was never seen alive again. 4 hours later, as the afternoon crowds began to thin toward evening, Denise Marie Naslund, 19 years old, got up from her blanket where she had been sitting with her boyfriend and several friends and walked toward the restroom facilities near the parking area. She did not return. Her boyfriend searched the beach. Her friends spread out and called her name. She was not there. She had simply ceased to be present between the blanket and the restrooms on a crowded public beach on the most popular day of the summer. In the hours and days that followed, Witnesses came to police with a description of the same young man, approximately 6 feet tall, athletic, dark brown hair, left arm in a blue sling, driving a tan or brown Volkswagen Beetle. He had approached at least 5 different women at the lake that day with some version of the same story. The sailboat. The hurt arm. Could you help me? And he had given his name to at least 2 of them. Ted, a composite sketch, was released. The name Ted was released. Tips poured in from across Washington state, and among those tips was a call from a woman named Elizabeth Klopfer, who lived in Seattle and had been dating a man named Ted Bundy for several years. She called the tip line and gave his name. She said she did not believe it was him, that she was probably wrong, but that he drove a tan Volkswagen Beetle, and that she felt she had to say something. The tip was logged and filed. There were thousands of tips. It was one name among many, and it was not yet time for it to mean anything. In the autumn of 1974, Ted Bundy packed his belongings into his tan Volkswagen Beetle and drove to Salt Lake City, Utah, where he had enrolled in the University of Utah College of Law. He was moving into a new state, away from the investigation, and into a new territory. The killings resumed within weeks. On October 2nd, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox disappeared from a residential neighborhood in the Salt Lake City suburb of Holiday. On October 18, Melissa Ann Smith, 17 years old, daughter of the Midvale chief of police, was last seen leaving a pizza parlor and never came home. Her father, who had spent his career believing that proximity to law enforcement offered a kind of protection, would spend the rest of his life with the knowledge that it had not protected his daughter. On October 31, Halloween night, Laura Ann Aim, 17, vanished after attending a party in American Fork Canyon outside the city. Her family spent Thanksgiving and Christmas and the New Year waiting for news that did not come. 3 young women in Utah in less than a month. In another state, with different detectives and different case files and no formal mechanism for comparing notes across jurisdictions, the same pattern was expanding. On November 8, 1974, a Friday evening, Carol DaRonch was 18 years old, and shopping alone at Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah, she was at a bookstore when a young man approached her. He was well-dressed, pleasant-looking, and he identified himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray City Police Department. He told her that someone had been seen trying to break into her car in the mall parking lot, that the suspect had been apprehended, that he needed her to come with him to the parking lot to identify her vehicle and then accompany him to the police substation to file a report. She went with him. He was authoritative and calm, and there was nothing in his manner that suggested anything other than what he appeared to be. In the parking lot, he led her to a tan Volkswagen Beetle. She hesitated, briefly, because this did not look like a police car, but he had an explanation ready, and he opened the door, and she got in. The door's locked. He reached across and snapped a handcuff around her right wrist. She screamed and fought, and he struggled to attach the other cuff to the steering wheel. He was driving now, erratically, one hand on the wheel and one trying to control her. He produced a pistol and pressed it to her head. She kept fighting. He swung a metal rod at her head and grazed her. She got the passenger door open and threw herself out onto the pavement of a residential street. A couple driving past saw a young woman in the road, bleeding from her head, shaking so severely she could barely stand. They stopped and took her in. She had survived. That same night, not far away, a 16-year-old girl named Deborah Jean Kent disappeared from the parking lot of a high school during a play. Investigators would later determine that a handcuff key was found outside the auditorium that night, the same kind used on the cuffs that had been attached to Carol DaRonch's wrist. Carol DaRonch was the first person to survive a Ted Bundy abduction attempt and reported with enough detail to matter. She remembered the face. She remembered the mustache he had worn. She remembered the car. She remembered every moment of it with a clarity that trauma sometimes produces. A kind of terrible precision that stays with survivors long after the immediate danger has passed. She was alive. She was talking. And the information she carried would, in time, become one of the most important pieces of the investigation. In Colorado in the first months of 1975, the pattern widened further. On January 12, Karen Eileen Campbell, 23 years old from Michigan, disappeared from the hallway of the Wildwood Inn at Snowmass Village, Colorado. She had been at the resort with her fiancé and his children. She stepped off the elevator on the second floor to return to their room to retrieve a magazine. The distance between the elevator and the room was perhaps 30 feet. She never covered it. She was found a month later in a snowfield off a highway, and the injuries to her skull told investigators what had happened to her. On March 15, Julie Cunningham, 26 years old, vanished while walking to a tavern in Vail. On April 6, Denise Oliverson, 24, of Grand Junction, left her parents' home on her bicycle and was not seen again. Her bicycle was found under a railroad bridge. On July 1st, Shelley Robertson, 24 years old, disappeared near Golden, Colorado. On July 4, Nancy Baird, 23, a young woman who worked at a gas station in Farmington, Utah, vanished from her shift. 6 states now: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and possibly others. Dozens of missing women whose cases existed in different jurisdictions, in different filing systems, in the minds of different detectives who had no structured way of seeing the whole picture at once. The scale of what was happening was invisible from any single vantage point. On the early morning of August 16, 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol sergeant named Bob Hayward was on patrol in the suburb of Granger, outside Salt Lake City, when he noticed a tan Volkswagen Beetle moving slowly through a residential neighborhood at 2:30 in the morning with its headlights off. It was not the kind of thing that required a confrontation. It was the kind of thing a patrol officer notices because it is unusual, because the hour is wrong and the manner of driving is wrong, and everything about the picture is subtly off. He turned on his lights. The Beetle accelerated. He pursued it for several blocks before the driver pulled into a gas station. The driver stepped out and was pleasant, well-spoken, cooperative. He said his name was Ted Bundy. He said he had been to see the Towering Inferno at a drive-in theater. He was calm in the way that some people are calm when they have been calm in this kind of situation before. Hayward asked to search the car. Inside, he found a ski mask, rope, a crowbar, handcuffs, garbage bags, strips of torn sheet, an ice pick, a pair of pantyhose with the eye holes cut out. There was no explanation for any of it that made any sense. Ted Bundy was taken to the police station. Detective Jerry Thompson ran the name through the system. And a connection appeared. A tan Volkswagen Beetle had been reported at a high school on the night that both Carol DaRonch was attacked and Deborah Jane Kent had disappeared. The connection was not conclusive, but it was something. They brought Carol DaRonch in. She sat in front of a lineup of 7 men, and she looked at each of them carefully, and she pointed at the man on the right end without hesitation. That was him. In February 1976, after a trial in which Carol DaRonch took the stand and described what had happened to her in the parking lot of Fashion Place Mall with a composure that courtroom observers found quietly devastating, Ted Bundy was convicted of aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. But the state of Colorado was not finished with him. the investigation into the murder of Karen Campbell had been building. The detective on the case, Mike Fisher, had been methodical and patient, and had developed evidence that tied Bundy to the Wildwood Inn on the night of her disappearance. In January 1977, Bundy was extradited to Aspen, Colorado, to stand trial for her murder. He fired his defense attorneys. He announced that he would represent himself, and he began paying attention to the architecture of the courthouse. The Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen is a Victorian building in the center of downtown, with high ceilings and old windows and a law library on the second floor that defendants representing themselves were permitted to use. The windows in the library opened fully. The drop to the garden below was approximately 12 feet. On June 7, 1977, during a break in a preliminary hearing, Ted Bundy walked into the law library, crossed to the window, and jumped. He sprained or broke his ankle on landing, but he ran. He ran in his courtroom clothes and dress shoes into the mountain wilderness surrounding Aspen. He ran without supplies, without money, without any plan beyond the immediate need to be somewhere other than where he was. He was free. For 6 days, Ted Bundy moved through the forests and mountains above Aspen. He broke into a cabin and ate canned food. He stole a car. He drove in circles, disoriented by the altitude and the pain in his ankle and the cold, and eventually found himself driving back toward Aspen because he was lost and did not know where else to go. He was stopped by police officers on a mountain road outside town who recognized him from the news coverage of his escape. He was returned to jail. He was transferred to the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, where the security was considered more reliable, and where he was placed under more careful observation. The trial had been postponed. There was time. There were months of time in a cell in Glenwood Springs while his legal situation wound through the courts. He used the time precisely. He learned from a fellow inmate that above the ceiling of his cell, accessed through the light fixture, there was a crawl space. He began studying the fixture. He began measuring the gap. And then he began losing weight. Not incidentally, not because the food was poor, but deliberately, systematically, reducing his frame to a specific target dimension because he had calculated the minimum width he would need to pass through the opening. And he intended to reach it. Over the following months, he lost approximately 35 pounds. On the night of December 30th, 1977, he waited until the jail was quiet. He climbed to the ceiling of his cell. He removed the light fixture. He pulled himself through the gap, 35 pounds thinner than he had been when he arrived, and into the crawl space above the building. He moved through the darkness above the cells, above the guards, above the sleeping jailer's apartment, which was empty that night because the jailer and his wife had gone out for New Year's Eve. He dropped into the apartment. He found civilian clothes and changed. He walked out the front door of the jail. Nobody noticed he was gone until the following afternoon. By then, he had a 17-hour head start. He hitchhiked to Vail. He took a bus to Denver. He flew to Chicago. He traveled by train through Michigan, then south to Atlanta, Georgia. He arrived in Tallahassee, Florida on January 8, 1978, 9 days after walking out of the Glenwood Springs jail. He was exhausted and careful and moving with the deliberate calm of someone who had planned this for a very long time. He found a rooming house at 409 West College Avenue, a few blocks from the Florida State University campus, and rented a room under the name Chris Hagen. He told his landlady he was a graduate student. She found him polite and quiet. He paid his first week's rent in cash. He was 1 mile from one of the largest university campuses in the southeastern United States. He was the most wanted fugitive in the Pacific Northwest. He was a convicted kidnapper and a suspected murderer in 4 states, and he was, by every visible measure, just another young man who had come to Tallahassee to go to school. In the weeks that followed his arrival, the mask began to slip. The controlled, purposeful person who had spent months planning his escape and executing it with precision started to fray at the edges. He stole bicycles and sold them for cash. He stole credit cards from other residents of the rooming house and ran up charges at restaurants and retail stores. He shoplifted food. He was burning through money and energy and restraint in a way that investigators who study serial offenders recognize as the precursor to escalation, the period of deterioration that precedes a return to violence when all other methods of satisfying whatever drives these men have been exhausted. The person he had become in Tallahassee was unraveling. And at 3:15 in the morning on January 15, 1978, what was left after the unraveling entered the back door of the Chi Omega house. We began this story there, in that house, with those 5 women. Now we can complete it. The investigation that morning was unlike anything the Tallahassee Police Department had encountered. The violence that had been done in that house was extraordinary in its speed and its brutality and its utter silence. 2 women dead, 2 others barely alive, and down the street, Cheryl Thomas in her apartment, beaten so severely she would never fully recover her hearing. Detectives processed the scene with exhausting care. The weapon appeared to be a piece of firewood taken from a holder near the front door, brought into the house by the attacker, used, and left behind. The attacker had moved through the house in darkness without waking the women who survived until the moment he was in their rooms. He had left almost nothing of himself behind. Almost nothing. On the skin of Lisa Levy's body, a forensic examiner found something that would eventually become the most important piece of evidence in the case: bite marks. 2 distinct impressions left in her skin with enough depth and definition that a forensic odontologist could photograph them, measure them, and compare them to a dental impression. But that evidence would take time to mean anything. And before it could, something else happened. On February 9, 1978, in Lake City, Florida, 100 miles from Tallahassee, a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach did not return to her classroom after leaving to retrieve a purse she had forgotten in another building. Her teachers noticed her absence and raised the alarm. Her classmates remembered seeing her in the hallway between buildings. A witness reported seeing a man lead a small girl toward a van in the school parking lot that morning. The description of the man was consistent: young, ordinary looking, the kind of person a child would not think to fear. Kimberly Leach was found 8 weeks later, on April 7th, in a deteriorated condition in an abandoned outbuilding near Suwannee River State Park, more than 60 miles from her school. She was 12 years old, and she was the youngest of Ted Bundy's confirmed victims, and her death is the one that his former FBI interviewer William Hagmaier later said produced the only reaction in Bundy that seemed to approach something like genuine shame. On February 15, 1978, 6 days after Kimberly Leach disappeared from her school, an officer named David Lee of the Pensacola Police Department was on patrol at 2 in the morning when he noticed an orange Volkswagen Beetle moving slowly through a residential area. He ran the plates. The car had been reported stolen from Tallahassee. He activated his lights and pulled the driver over. The driver stepped out of the car and was cooperative and calm and gave his name as Ken Misner, a student. Officer Lee asked him to place his hands on the car while he checked the identification. And then Ted Bundy ran. He made it less than 50 yards before Officer Lee tackled him to the ground on a residential street in Pensacola. He went down hard and did not fight further. He lay on the pavement, and what he said in that moment stayed with David Lee for the rest of his life. He said, "I wish you had killed me." He was taken to the Pensacola Police Department. His fingerprints were taken. Within hours, his real identity came back through the system. Theodore Robert Bundy. Escaped prisoner from Glenwood Springs, Colorado, convicted kidnapper, suspect in the disappearance, and presumed murder of dozens of women across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado. Now sitting in a police station in Pensacola, Florida, where 2 young women had been murdered in their beds 5 weeks earlier, and a 12-year-old girl had been missing for 6 days. He had been free for 46 days. He had been free for 46 days. And what he had done with that freedom had brought the total number of lives destroyed by Ted Bundy to a number that investigators would spend years trying to calculate with certainty. What followed was unlike anything American criminal law had produced up to that point. The state of Florida charged Bundy with the murders of Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, and the attempted murders of Karen Chandler, Kathy Kleiner, and Cheryl Thomas. He was transferred to a facility in Tallahassee, and he did again what he had done in Colorado. He fired his attorneys. He declared that he would represent himself. He told the court that he was prepared to conduct his own defense. The cameras arrived. Florida had changed its rules about courtroom cameras in 1977, and the trial of Ted Bundy, which began in Miami in June of 1979, was one of the first major criminal proceedings in American history to be broadcast live to a national television audience. Millions of people watched a man accused of some of the most violent crimes in the country's recent history cross, examine witnesses, raise objections, confer with legal advisors, and perform the role of his own defense attorney with a fluency that disturbed observers as much as anything else about the proceeding. Letters arrived for him at the jail in enormous quantities. Photographs, marriage proposals. A woman named Carol Ann Boone, who had known him in Washington State, moved to Florida and attended every session of the trial, and would eventually, in a moment that seemed to many observers designed as theater, marry him on the stand during the penalty phase of the proceedings, using a quirk of Florida law that recognized in court declarations as legally binding marriages. She would later have his child while he was on death row. The prosecution's case rested on several foundations. A Chi Omega resident named Nita Neary had returned to the sorority house in the early hours of January 15, and entering through the front door, had seen a man in the foyer wearing a dark knit cap pulled down low. She had seen his profile clearly in the light from outside. She was brought to the stand, and she identified Ted Bundy. Then there was the forensic evidence. A forensic odontologist named Dr. Richard Souveron took the stand and placed before the jury a sequence of photographs that the jury studied in silence. The photographs showed the bite marks on Lisa Levy's body. They showed a dental mold taken from Ted Bundy's upper and lower teeth, with the specific and individual irregularities, the slight misalignment, the particular pattern of his bite, that no other person's teeth would reproduce. They showed the comparison side by side, overlay against overlay, until the jury was looking at a match that Dr. Souveron testified was, in his expert opinion, conclusive, on July 23, 1979. After deliberating for 6 hours and 55 minutes, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. During the penalty phase, Ted Bundy addressed the court. He spoke about justice. He spoke about the system. He spoke about himself. And the words he chose were of a man performing a concept of himself rather than expressing a reality. The jury deliberated and returned and recommended death. Judge Edward Cowart, who had presided over the trial with a kind of weary patience, sentenced Ted Bundy to die in the electric chair. Before he read the sentence, he said something that became, in its way, famous, He told Bundy that it was a tragedy, that he was a bright young man, that he would have made a good lawyer, that he would have been a fine member of society. And then he sentenced him to death twice, for the two murders to be carried out simultaneously. A year later, in Orlando, Bundy stood trial for the murder of Kimberly Leach. The evidence in that case included eyewitness accounts, forensic material, and the testimony of a fire captain who had seen Bundy on the day of Kimberly Leach's disappearance near the Lake City school. He was convicted. He received a third death sentence. He was transferred to Florida State Prison in Rayford to the death row unit, where he would spend the next 9 years. On death row, Ted Bundy became something that American culture had not quite produced before: a celebrity criminal. He gave interviews. He cooperated with researchers and psychologists and writers who came to study him. He corresponded at length with a retired FBI agent named William Hagmeyer, who became over years of conversation the closest thing Bundy had to a confidant, the person to whom he spoke most honestly about what he had done and what he believed himself to be. Anne Rule published The Stranger Beside Me in 1980, the account of her years working beside him at the crisis hotline, of having liked him and trusted him and felt warmth toward him, and then of watching the evidence accumulate and understanding that the person she had known was not real. The book raised a question that no true crime work before it had posed so directly. What does it mean when the person sitting beside you, the person answering phones and helping strangers and making you laugh during a long night shift, is also the thing you are most afraid of? As the 1980s advanced and his appeals ran their course and the date of his execution drew closer, Bundy began confessing. He offered confessions selectively, strategically, as bargaining chips for additional stays of execution. Each confession came with a request for more time, more delay. Investigators from multiple states flew to Florida to sit with him in interview rooms and listen to him describe cases that had been cold for years, victims who had been missing and unidentified, places where remains could be found. He was cooperative and calm and detailed, and in some cases he led detectives to locations where the remains of women he had killed were still present. He confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. He provided the identities of women whose remains had never been identified. He gave families the answers they had been waiting for years to receive. He allowed investigators to close cases that had seemed permanently open. He did all of this while also asking for more time, for more delays, for one more hearing, one more appeal, one more morning in which he was still alive. The confessions covered 30 victims. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, which had studied his case extensively, believed the real number was higher. Some investigators who had worked on Pacific Northwest cases in the 1970s believed it could be significantly higher, and that there were victims in states and time periods that had never formally been associated with his name. Ted Bundy had traveled widely. He had lived in multiple cities. He had been young and mobile for years before the investigation ever began. The complete truth of it went with him. On January 23, 1989, the day before his scheduled execution, Ted Bundy sat for a final interview with Dr. James Dobson, a psychologist and Christian broadcaster. In that interview, Bundy spoke at length about pornography, about the role he believed it had played in his development, about the responsibility of the culture for producing men like him. He was composed and articulate, and he seemed to those who watched the interview to be, in some fundamental way, still performing, still constructing a narrative, still attempting to shape the story of what he was in the final hours available to him. That night, in Florida State Prison, he wrote a letter to his mother, Eleanor. The letter has never been made fully public. Its existence was confirmed by those who saw it. Whatever it contained, it was the last thing Ted Bundy ever wrote. On January 24, 1989, at approximately 6 o'clock in the morning, outside the walls of Florida State Prison in Stark, a crowd of approximately 2,000 people had assembled in the pre-dawn dark. They held signs and candles and transistor radios tuned to news broadcasts. Some of them were celebrating. Some of them held photographs of the women who had been killed. Some of them had been there for hours. The crowd was estimated later at 2,000, though some accounts put it higher. It was cold and dark, and the lights of the prison were visible over the wall, and the people in the crowd pressed forward as the hour approached. Inside the prison, Ted Bundy ate a last meal that he declined to choose. A steak and eggs was provided, the standard offering. He did not eat much of it. His spiritual advisor, a minister named Fred Lawrence, sat with him. He said goodbye to the people who had come to say goodbye to him. Carol Ann Boone, his wife, had left Florida with their daughter and had not come. She had stopped visiting months before. Whatever the marriage had meant to either of them, it had ended quietly and without announcement. At 6:16 in the morning, Ted Bundy was escorted into the execution chamber and secured to the chair. The hood was placed over his head. At 6:17, the current was applied. Outside the prison walls, a cheer went up from the crowd. Inside, a corrections officer removed the hood. A court reporter noted the time. The body was removed. The process that followed was the same one that follows every execution in Florida. The paperwork and the documentation and the official recording of a thing that has been officially completed. Theodore Robert Bundy, 42 years old, was dead. In the days that followed, investigators from across the country spent time reviewing the confessions, the evidence, the timelines, trying to establish the final accounting. The official number of confirmed victims was 30. The number of women whose names appear in the investigation records, who are connected to him by geography and timeline, and physical type and methodology, is larger. The number that some investigators believe to be the true total is larger still. What we know with certainty is this: Linda Ann Healy, 21 years old, psychology student, weather reporter, taken from her basement room in the night. Donna Gail Manson, 19, free-spirited and funny and on her way to a jazz concert. Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18, a freshman who simply stopped existing between two campus buildings. Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22, gone between her dormitory and a restaurant. Brenda Carol Ball, 22, last seen at a tavern on a summer night. Georgian Hawkins, 18, who walked down a well-lit alleyway and did not come out the other end. Janice Ann Ott, 23, who lay down her book and walked away with a stranger who needed help. Denise Marie Naslund, 19, who got up from her blanket on the busiest beach day of the summer and did not come back. Nancy Wilcox, 16, Melissa Ann Smith, 17, whose father had spent his life protecting others. Laura Ann Aim, 17, who had gone to a Halloween party. Deborah Jean Kent, 16, taken from a high school parking lot. Karen Eileen Campbell, 23, who stepped off an elevator and covered 30 feet of a hotel hallway and did not reach her room. Julie Cunningham, 26, who had been walking to dinner. Denise Oliverson, 24, on her bicycle. Lynette Dawn Culver, 12 years old, from Pocatello, Idaho. Shelley Robertson, 24. Nancy Baird, 23. Lisa Levy, 20, who had been out dancing and came home happy. Margaret Bowman, 21, who was called vivid and warm and full of plans. Kimberly Leach, 12 years old, who had gone to retrieve a forgotten purse. These are the names we know. There are others. The mythology of Ted Bundy, and there is a mythology constructed partly by him in his lifetime and reinforced by every documentary and true crime account that followed, tends to center on him. On his intelligence, his charm, his law school ambitions, his political career, the way he fooled everyone. The mythology asks, how could someone like that do something like this? And it is a fair question, because the answer tells us something important about the space between what people appear to be and what they actually are. But the question that sits underneath it, quieter and more enduring, is not about him at all. The pattern is not about the predator. The pattern is about the lives that existed before the predator found them, the plans and the futures and the ordinary late nights and the jazz concerts and the dance recitals and the bicycles under the railroad bridge. The pattern is 23 names that we know of, and whatever names we do not know, and all of the people who spent years waiting for answers that came too late or never came at all. The families, the roommates who made the bed in the morning and found only a pillow with a bloodstain, the boyfriend who sat on a beach blanket and waited for someone to come back from the restrooms, the father who had given his life to law enforcement and could not protect his own daughter. The pattern is always about them. Ted Bundy understood that the story he was part of would survive him. He said so in various ways across the 9 years he spent on death row. He wanted to be studied. He wanted to be understood. He wanted the conversation about him to continue after the chair. He got his wish, and that is perhaps the most disturbing thing about the entire case. Because the conversation should be about them. It always should have been about them.